It's interesting, by late July, after Kilmallock, which is the really only big battle in the war, with armored artillery back and forth, etc. There's Limerick and Cork, and they've lost everything. But you get a big battle like Kilmallock, and the Republicans don't have a strategy. They fail. It takes about 4 or 5 days, and they're failed. So why didn't they realize they were failed? Well, they were diehards. They didn't want to recognize failure.
We're here at the Béal na Bláth ambush site where Michael Collins died. We're going to be looking at the different positionings that the anti-treaty troops were in. Okay, in terms of drone footage, you're able to get a unique, original insight into it, and we're going to be exploring the different areas that the fighting took place.
As I stood on the site at 8:10 of a 22nd August evening on a number of occasions, just trying to visualize the scene and where the shooters that were up there.
That road is a little bit more curved then than it is now.
And it's because it's on a bend, it creates 3 lines of fire behind at the top end of the path. Anyone who's in that corridor is being hit from behind, is being hit from on high, and then all along the path can be hit on the straight.
According to the map here, there's one source of anti-treaty fire was coming from up over the hill, and Emmett Dalton had mentioned this as well, coming from over here. Okay, these are the Béal na Bláth troops, but also you have the area occupied over there by anti-treaty sides as well. So you would have had Sonny O'Neill, and you would have had Timmy Sullivan and all those firing from there. You would have had a party that were over here initially, okay, but they got held down under fire from the Free State troops here.
The anti-treaty forces were up in this area here. This area up here is very, very straight uphill.
Some 20 to 30 fighters were ready along the upper road, where they have 3 safe escape routes through farm lanes such as Walsh's Lane, Long's Lane and Foley's Lane.
And they were waiting so long and didn't think that they were going to come on that road, that Tom Hales actually ordered for them to dismantle the mine. And that's when the convoy actually approached.
Then they went in. They had 3 roads to choose. They had the Kinsale Road was open. The bridge has been blown, but they could go to Inishano and go south.
Kinsale Road was surely open, and while several authors affirmed that the main road was impassable with barricades and mines, Sean Hales took it the same night to reach Cork.
The main road through Inishano was closed in the morning, but it seems it was already open. And there was the old road through Crossbar. It was open.
Speculations are that Michael Collins was going to another meeting in Macroom, though it is not clear if he was going to meet Florrie O'Donoghue again.
But he chose the road they came that led back to Macroom. Was he going to meet someone else in Macroom? We don't know. It's what he wants to do in Macroom. We don't know.
Garda John Hickey's 1924 report on the death of Collins has said that the anti-treaty knew Collins was to visit Canon Tracy because the priest's housekeeper revealed to the owner of the public house in Crickstown that Michael Collins was coming on the 22nd of August, and the Canon planned a 4 o'clock lunch.
Tom Barry, in his final years of his life, made a claim to the Collins family that the roads had been mined, save one. Anti-treaty forces knew of the presence of Collins and had arranged a pathway through. The way back was not guaranteed to be safe as it depended on the result of meeting in Béal. In the evening, both Cross and Deasy left divisional headquarters and walked the 4 miles to Béal, where brigade headquarters were, and arrived there about 7 p.m. and then walked to the ambush site. There they met Tom Hales, who was in charge, and after a discussion decided that the convoy would not return that evening. A decision was made, probably by Liam Deasy, to call off the ambush.
The only thing the anti-treaty could find to barricade the road was a brewer's cart.
When the main party had moved, a Cork No. 3 section remained to cover the withdrawal and clear the road.
Carroll's Bridge is the entrance to the Boreen. According
Yes.
to some versions, a mine was put right before the bridge.
They've dismantled the cart, pushed it to the side, taken down the mine, laid across the road.
This is the area here that would have been where the cart was and where the mine would have been down here as well. They would have been waiting all day for Collins to come through.
Edward O'Mahony and Patrick Tuhig, both local authors, puts it on the south side of the bridge, while other sources put it slightly on the north side. And according to some sources, a smaller one was put on the access to the Boreen. At least one witness mentions a third mine also on the lower road.
Most authors said that there was only one mine. Some put up to 3 mines. A smaller on the Boreen and 2 on the road.
According to Tom Foley, the purpose of the mine was to halt the convoy at the barricade while it destroyed the Slieve na Man, or at least prevented its return to Bandon. The small mine was to be used to prevent the Slieve na Man from crossing the bridge and taking the ambush party on the right flank. A third mine was sunk in the roadway in front of the cart barricade, its cables visible to the motorcycle scout. A bird could not have escaped from the trap, remarked Tom. Tom Foley was interviewed by Father Patrick Tuhig for Michael Collins' The Dark Secret of Béal na Bláth.
They dismantled the mine because otherwise the mine would have blown up, glass would have been everywhere, nobody would have got through, the road would have been blocked, 3 lines of fire coming down from behind, from the top and from this side, and they'd been all in an enfiladed fire, you know, it would have been everyone shot. The guys up on still sitting up there, they were just chatting, like the days.
Yeah.
We're finished now, they'll be going over to safe houses across in the hinterland. The others are walking down towards Long's pub.
The anti-treaty had cleared the mine to have the road opened for farmers going to the creamery the next morning. A signalman had been placed at the top of the height, near Bradfield's Cross. He had a white flag and knew Morse code. We all learned it at school, said Tom Foley, who was part of the anti-treaty ambush. At 7:30 p.m, the flagman was seen frantically waving the letter U for warning, which was 2 dots and a dash. His signal read, "Coming."
They're strolling down the road. The guys up on the hill hear initially the motorcycle, Lieutenant Smith. They fire a shot in the air to warn the guys walking along the road.
The sound of motor vehicles crackled through the air. "They're coming!" roared Hurley. The convoy was heading into the Béal na Bláth Valley. The motorcyclist J.J. Smith spotted the cable. "Mine! Mine!" he yelled, jolting his motorbike around and heading back to sound the alarm to the convoy. Tom Kelleher shouted to Jim Hurley, "Better fire a few shots. Hales is at the barricade. He'll be destroyed."
So Tom Hales, who had been there and overseeing this, he sort of caught in the immediate battle because he was on the road helping to remove the cart or the mine.
Jim Hurley and Tom Kelleher, the officer in charge of the party, were on the road, and they raced through Carroll's Bridge up to the Boreen just in time to hide from the motorcycle scout of the convoy.
It is believed that Tom Kelleher gave the first shot. Tom Kelleher shot at the Crossley tender, and it's believed that Jim Hurley shot at the touring car.
It is, however, unlikely that any of them could see the barricade ahead, as they were beyond the bend on the twisting road. At this time, the Crossley tender was right in front of Kelleher and Hurley, and the soldiers were engaging those two while trying to take the cart off the road.
But a convoy would also be accordioning, if you think of it the way an accordion works on a rural road like this, just with the nature of the topography. But point I'm making is that they're not going to be, nose to tail, so to speak. The reason for that is that if one comes under fire, the rest aren't necessarily going to come under fire, and they can assess the position from where they are and then move forward to support their comrades under fire.
So there were a couple of shots at first, then the other people who are there started to fire. The soldiers jumped from the Crossley tender, from the touring car, and the shooting started.
There's confusion over his position, though, is there?
There is, and again, it's like Liam Deasy and Tom Kelleher. One account is that Hales was gone before the gunfire started, but then Kelleher says that that Tom Hales was actually on the road when the convoy. He dived into the Boreen nearby, and then managed to scramble up and make his way with a group of other men. Up the mountain or up the hill, away from the scene.
Tom Hales would have been just up here.
And from that, I suppose from both accounts, what that says is that Hales was not present when the fatal shot was fired.
Interestingly, Liam Deasy has said he was with Tom Hales when he heard the shots.
According to Liam Deasy, when they heard the first shots, they ran through the fields. Above.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
The only one that knows where Tom Hales was on that day, at that moment, is Tom Hales.
Mead Ryan's book has said that nearer to Long's public house, Liam Deasy and Pete Kearney were strolling along when the gunfire broke out. They were further north, but on the same side as Bill Powell and John Lorden. It took them 10 to 15 minutes to make their way to the hilltop.
Liam Deasy, as I mentioned beforehand, arrived on the scene of Bláth from divisional headquarters at 7 o'clock. So there was a short window when they had ordered to disband the ambush, and when they came back on the ambush.
Liam Deasy, for example, says that he was sitting with Tom Hales to have their tea when they heard the shots and went out with their rifles.
They must have heard the first shots, then they ran, so when they arrived at that position, it should be like 10 minutes later. It's a third of the battle maybe. Okay. But they were too far to make any difference.
Liam Deasy claimed he had a mental blank when it came to Béal na Bláth in his uncomfortable interview, tape 7, with Father John Chisholm. Gerard Murphy had access to this from Eve Morrison for his book on Michael Collins. Mead Ryan's book states that Pete Kearney and Liam Deasy were hurrying up the hill and could see very little, yet let off some shots to distract the convoy. Emmett Dalton had pointed up, and I presume he would have pointed at Deasy's direction. Father Patrick Tuhig places Pete Kearney in a more southerly position, heading towards Newstown. Carney tormented himself that he killed Collins with a ricochet bullet in a confession to Father Jerome Hurley, yet he never mentions Béal na Bláth at all in his military pension application. According to one of the soldiers on the Crossley tender, a few minutes before reaching the site of Béal na Bláth, the commander-in-chief took his rifle from the floor and put it across his knees.
Emmett Dalton says to Collins, says to the driver, "Drive like hell." And Collins says, "No, we'll stop and fight them. Nobody, it's his country. This is Collins' country."
When the first shots were fired, Dalton ordered, "Drive like hell." Collins countermanded the order, just as he had predicted, and yelled, "Stop, we'll fight them." Collins was intent on putting up a fight because he felt that a show of force was going to be necessary if they had decided not to enter into the peace negotiations.
You thought that you could beat them, you thought you'd superior weaponry, and you'd say, "I'm sick and tired of these fellas going for me now, I'm just going to blow them out of the water. I've got the machine gun, I'm going to show them," because you have to remember, Mark was for attempting his life for number 3, because there was something outside Mary's house, and maybe he was just sick to death of these attempts, disarming the fellas, giving him a clip in the ear. Now he was going to go, "Now I've got the machine gun, I'm going to show these boys."
On the 18th of August, Michael Collins was ambushed in his car near Stillorgan, County Dublin, with a bomb and 20 or 30 rifle shots. His driver was hospitalised and his car was damaged.
When Collins said, "No, we'll fight them right here," that was a very inexperienced person's kind of thing. You want to get out of where the killing zone is. That's exactly what you do with an ambush. You always try and either go forward or back. You don't want to go side to side.
Dalton wasn't familiar with guerrilla situations. He may have believed they couldn't see the barricade from where they were. He may have believed that the road was clear.
Sean Boyne's book on Emmett Dalton has stated that Dalton believed it would be foolish to make a stand in a location chosen by the enemy, and that they were firing from higher ground. Joe Dolan, who'd been in the back of the armoured car, regretted that it wasn't one of Collins's regular drivers who was driving. They would have understood the impetuous nature of Collins and would have obeyed Dalton's order to drive away at high speed. The machine gunner John McPeak believed there was no need to stand and fight. "I will never understand why we had to halt," McPeak has said. Dalton, Collins and the 2 drivers, Michael Carey and Michael Quinn, dismounted from the touring car, taking cover behind a 2-foot-high ditch. Dalton believed most of the fire was coming from a hidden roadway on a small hill to their left, in other words, their west. Michael Collins and Emmett Dalton were lying within an arm's length of each other, firing rapidly at their seldom visible enemies. The armoured car had backed up and opened fire on the ambushed party. According to Sean O'Connell, the belts fell off and it stopped firing. Dalton was told by McPeak, "The gun is jammed, sir."
And the second, he basically pinned them down.
The person who was with McPeak, filling the belts, wasn't used to how it worked, and the third belt wasn't very well aligned, so it started to only fire 1 shot at a time. There was a lull in the enemy's attack. Collins jumped to his feet, walked over behind the armoured car, trying to see the enemy's position more clearly. "There they are, running up the road," Dalton had quoted Collins as saying. Collins ran 15 yards beyond the armoured car and started firing on the retreating enemy. Emmett Dalton's account of what happened states, "General Collins now jumped up to his feet and walked over behind the armoured car. obviously to obtain a better view of the enemy's position. He remained there, firing occasional shots and using the car as cover. Suddenly, I heard him shout, "Come on, boys! There they are, running up the road." I immediately opened fire upon two figures that came in view on the opposite road. When I next turned around, the Commander-in-Chief had left the car position and had run about 15 yards back up the road. Here he dropped into the prone firing position and opened up on our retreating enemies. Sean O'Connell arrived under fire to tell Emmett Dalton the obstacle in the road was removed. He asked, "Where's the big fella?" Dalton had replied, "He's all right. He's gone a few yards up the road. I hear him firing away." Martin Carey, who had been near Collins during the ambush at this stage, had said, "General Collins, who had been lying firing from a position 6 feet from me, now stood erect, and after firing several rounds, fell on the roadside with a gaping wound near the left earlobe, extending to the upper section of the skull."
Collins spotted them, walked out, and made himself an easy target for O'Neill, who was waiting for that one shot.
Suddenly, Dalton heard a cry. He and O'Connell ran and found Collins lying motionless in the firing position, according to Dalton, firmly gripping his rifle. Emmett Dalton has said that after Collins was shot, the enemy must have seen that something had occurred to cause such a sudden cessation of our fire, because they intensified their own. Emmett Dalton states that Sean O'Connell now knelt beside the dying chief. I knelt beside them both and kept up bursts of rapid fire, which I continued whilst O'Connell dragged the chief across the road and behind the armoured car. Dalton recalls it was a very large wound, difficult for me to get a first field aid bandage to cover it. It was quite obvious to me it could only have been a ricochet or a dum-dum. Noting that the fire of our enemies had greatly abated and that they had practically all retreated, with the assistance of Lieutenant Smith, we endeavoured to lift Collins onto the back of the armoured car. Lieutenant Smith was shot in the neck. He remained on his feet, however, and helped us carry our precious burden around a turn in the road and under cover of the armoured car.
How can I describe the feelings that were mine in that bleak hour, kneeling in the mud of a country road, not 12 miles from Clonakilty, with the still bleeding head of the idol of Ireland resting on my arm.
McPeak had served in the Machine Gun Corps of the Sutherland Highlanders in World War I. Anti-treaty fighters in their witness statements at Béal na Bláth have discussed the accuracy of the machine gun fire on their positions. McPeak himself has said, "The officer helping to refill the belt wasn't really able to do it properly. I demonstrated how it should be done, that each round should be absolutely even at the caps. You had to put them on a perfect edge. Not one of them should be 1/8 of an inch out. But of course, this was what was happening. From then on, there was nothing but stoppages, continuous stoppages. You had to clear the gun. You had to take the round out. This meant desultory fire." Drivers in the cross-street tender, Leyland touring car and Sleeved Man had all been replaced. The loader of the Vickers machine gun, who had been assigned in Dublin, had been replaced in Cork by someone less experienced.
Collins and Dalton first fired from behind the armoured car, and then Collins shouted, "There, they are running up the road." The Lewis machine gun in the armoured car jammed several times, and when it did, the IRA Republicans took advantage of the lull in firing to move to their positions.
He was regarded with suspicion. It's very unlikely, though, he could aim a shot from where he was inside the turret of the armoured car. It was basically discarded that it was possible.
2 belts that were ready, he let the first go. Basically, he said he wanted to make them know there was a machine gun.
The McPeak, the guy who's controlling it, later stole the armoured car and went to the other side.
He deserted on December 2nd, 1922 with Billy Barry and Pat and Mick O'Sullivan, and took the armoured car to the IRA. He said he did it for a woman, but in reality would have been a victim of a lot of flack and some suspicion for the machine gun jamming. He was arrested in Glasgow in July 1923 and was imprisoned in Portlaoise, where he went on a hunger strike.
There had been no mention in court proceedings or suspicion that McPeak was the one who might have killed Collins. He was charged with stealing the Slievenamon Rolls Royce and its contents, and he was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment.
If they had any suspicions that was more than hearsay, he would have been probably tried for it, because he was tried for the stealing of the American.
Now, Tom Kelleher and Jim Hurley's initial point would have been
they when they heard the convoy approaching, they were actually on the barricades. They ran through the Bureen and took positions up the Bureen.
Some Free State soldiers went up here to the Bureen after pushing the cart from the road. Okay, so they're chasing the Republican troop.
Yeah, this was the initial ambush position where the bulk of the anti-treaty were deployed to ambush the convoy, which was coming from the southern direction over here, just which you can't see from here, but the foliage that's there now. But if you look up here to the west, this was another one of the escape routes.
They were in separate groups. Probably they didn't know who had already gone and who was still there. Yeah. Probably the variation of the numbers is due to this.
So how many men are we talking that would have been along this road? You had Jim Hurley and Tom Kelleher up here, but is there anybody else that would have been here?
According to what Tom Hayes told to Jim Hurley, who wrote to Florio Donahue, there were around 7 or 8 men left behind. The numbers vary from 4 to 8, no more than 8.
The men around the area at Long's Lane would have included Dan Holland and John O'Callaghan. One of the men around this area was shot on the buttocks, but only noticed when he was sitting down for his tea later.
Along here,
yeah,
this section of the Bowreen here is where the anti-treaty men were pinned down in the fight.
They found a place to fire there, right in front of the armoured car. They couldn't do much for the armoured car.
Now, Derek, where you're currently facing, you're facing the cross, which is where that telegraph pole is.
Where Collins, Dalton and the drivers found cover behind a small ditch by the stream.
If you look at this hedgerow here, it's solid.
Yeah.
Absolutely solid. That's been there for a long time. All you have to do is throw yourself down here. You can nearly be in a lying position with perfect cover. And if you're looking at where you're going to be shooting the targets there, you're probably talking about no more than 50, 60, 70 yards. It's absolutely perfect. They can't see you. If they do and they shoot back, you've got perfect cover here. You're looking at here. The enemy is coming along here. You're shooting at them from the side, from an elevated position. But you've also got a river, a fast-flowing stream and a ditch between them and you. This is absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
For a good ambush position, you want to have visibility on the enemy without them having visibility on you.
Yeah.
Obstacles in the way of the enemy getting at you, and a good escape route that's covered for yourself. They had all that. So if you can imagine the scene, the noise, you know, what you're going to have here is, if you're under fire from a Vickers machine gun, it's probably going to feel like the grass is being cut around your head by the bullets that are whipping through the air.
They were sort of pinned down until the gun jammed. So they made the retreat after that.
Then Long's Lane, which is here.
Yes.
This is Long's Lane, one of 3 laneways that led perpendicularly away from towards high ground.
If the shot was fired from the front, it would have been from Collins's left-hand side. But where Long's Lane is, would have been on Collins's right-hand side. None of the men in the position where Long's Lane is was Sonny O'Neill. It could be argued that Collins could have been hit from Long's Lane if it hit the back of the head while Collins was looking down the road towards Bandon.
Some accounts in some books, such as the Atlas of Irish Revolution, have argued that the fatal shot that hit Collins came from Long's Lane. However, Tom Kelleher, in an interview which features in the Father Patrick Tuhig book, has given the positions. Kelleher has said, "At my right would have been O'Callaghan. He couldn't fire shots because he was loaded with the mine equipment. Beyond him were Sonny O'Neill and Dan Holland." Also, he states that Dan Holland would have had a small gun. Tom Kelleher has also stated from his position that he didn't see Collins being shot.
Apparently, one of the groups was passing when they heard the first shot. The other was a bit far. They arrived later.
2 groups of Kerry fighters arrived on the scene, including Bob O'Doherty and Mike O'Donoghue. High above the valley of the Nonine, they could look down on the road. They were on a plateau about 80 feet above. Patrick Tuhig, in The Dark Secret of Béal na Bláth, interviewed Michael O'Donoghue. He had said, "We saw an army column stopped on the road below. Of course we threw ourselves down. The shooting was stopped now."
Michael O'Donoghue was of Glenflesk, County Kerry. He was an intelligence officer to the Glenflesk D Company No. 2 Battalion of the East Kerry Brigade of the IRA. He and some others had been walking home on the old Bantry Road from Cork City through Béal na Bláth. He'd fought at Cork Harbour to prevent the Free State Army from landing by sea. As Mike Donoghue and others came to Béal na Bláth, they were greeted by the sound of gunfire.
There were at least 1 man from each group who claimed to have shot Michael Collins.
They were going home, they heard the shots and they approached different groups. They took a few shots each. Bob Doherty says in his military pension file, it's one of the few people actually who mentioned he was in Béal na Bláth.
Bob Doherty has recounted to Patrick Tuhig, "We died for cover. There were some men already in position near us and a little distance away. I didn't know who they were. There was an armed column below us on the road, and a big man started to walk away from it. Someone near us fired just then, and I saw the big man fall. I heard him say, 'I put 2 into him.' That's all I know." Michael O'Donoghue told Patrick Tuhig in his book The Dark Secret of Béal na Bláth that
there was a whippet armoured car at the end of the line, and there was a big man like he was standing on top of it, in silhouette, looking around. The fellow next to me put up his gun and fired a shot, and we saw the big man fall. I hit down the gun and said to him, "What did you do that for? Do you want to draw them on us?" And we skedaddled.
Michael O'Donoghue had said they didn't know anything until the next day when they saw that Michael Collins was killed. The afternoon paper, the Evening Echo, carried full cover of the sensational story on Wednesday.
But both groups could well be the authors of the photo shot. Yes.
Another person who rushed to help the ambushers was Dennis Sonny O'Neill, a former RIC and British soldier who joined his brothers in the fight for Irish independence. He is said to have arrived from Foley's Lane on the opposite side of the ambush, from where he could have fired from behind. No one on the pro-treaty side claimed to have seen Collins being hit, but at least 3 men on the anti-treaty side, including Sonny O'Neill and 2 of the Kerry men, Mike O'Donoghue and Bob Doherty, are said to have aimed at the lonely figure on the road and seen the big man fall.
Who do you think is a likely candidate for Collins' death?
I think Sonny probably did it.
It was Sonny O'Neill, because he was known as the crack shot, the ex-British soldier. Look, at the end of the day, Marcus, my granddad said Sonny O'Neill, I'm not going to go against him.
Sonny O'Neill was formerly an RIC man like his brother. He was a mounted constable and musketry instructor. He fought in World War I for the British Army in France as a marksman and was regarded as a first-class shot. Discharged from service in 1917 due to a wound to his right arm, he found on returning from the war all his family involved either in the IRA or Cumann na mBan in the War of Independence. He joined in 1918 too. He instructed local units in the use of arms. He was introduced to Michael Collins by Liam Deasy and later Tom Barry at GHQ. He was considered a prize intelligence asset due to his free access to the RIC depot, Dublin Castle, and various British Army clubs such as the South Irish Horse Club in Merrion Square. In 1920 he became storeman in Victoria Barracks, now known as Collins Barracks, and Bear Island. He did intelligence work for Collins in Cork and Dublin. Frank Thornton recalls him as the man who supplied us with information on the IGO gang. He hardly ever smiled and never looked a person in the eye. He was described as undoubtedly a dangerous man. He went anti-treaty, and on 1st of July 1922 in Mallow, he was appointed captain by Liam Deasy as a training officer to organise 2 divisional cavalry columns at Ballincollig Barracks. He took 1 column of 30 men and horses to Macroom in August, where there was a divisional meeting being held.
Then they went behind the armored car, or at least Collins went. Late, when the man in the lorry managed to remove the barricade, they came to help.
Yeah, okay, so then he goes then from the touring car to the armoured car,
Yes.
some firing, and then he sees then the men retreating.
He was looking left, so he might have seen someone running along the brink.
The position of Sonny O'Neill is disputed, and not all authors agree on whether he was there or where he was placed during the running skirmish. He ran up to the Boreen from Foley's Lane in the direction of the ambush.
He was a sniper in the World War, the First War.
This is a number 1 Mark I Lee Enfield carbine in the RIC pattern. It fires a .303 cartridge. If you're in a tight spot, you pull out the cutoff and you have 6 rounds available for immediate use.
So he knew very much what to do with the rifle, with the Lee Enfield. He shot from where he was. He shot the armored car first when Jock McPeak opened the lead. Yeah. Apparently he shot it.
When he saw the man standing on the road, it was quite dark and very unlikely he could see who he was. So he fired.
According to Mead O'Ryan, Tom Hales had a statement given to his brother Major General Sean Hales, who were on opposite sides. It said the column had pulled out of position and only a few men of a rearguard party were there when the car came in sight. They knew they had killed an officer of very high rank with one of the last shots fired, but they had no idea who that officer was. This was dated 22nd of August 1922.
According to Bill Powell's 1974 interview with Meada Ryan, Dennis Sonny O'Neill declared to Timmy Sullivan, "I dropped one man anyway." Timmy Sullivan had replied, "You're a crack shot." Liam Deasy had arrived fuming. "Why didn't you blow up that blasted mine?" Timmy Sullivan replied, "The mine was disconnected. They were your orders, sir." Sonny O'Neill had said, "We got one man." In Bill Murray's kitchen, Bill Powell, Dennis Sonny O'Neill, Denis Bryan, Tyg O'Sullivan, Con Murphy, and John Lorden began to analyse the day's events. All agreed 15 minutes earlier and the lot would have been wiped out. It would have been a successful ambush, but now Liam Deasy would have to answer to Liam Lynch. Sonny O'Neill, who was seated at Bill Powell's left, had said at least he had dropped one man. They all agreed getting one man showed they were an effective armed force. Sean O'Galvin burst in. Michael Collins was shot. Bill Powell felt a grip on his left arm. Sean O'Galvin had gotten word from Father Murphy's housekeeper because the convoy had called there. "He's dead. May the Lord have mercy on his soul," said Sonny O'Neill, according to Bill Powell. The following day, Sonny O'Neill and Jim Carney had spoken. "I used the wrong bullets," said Sonny O'Neill. "What do you mean?" said Jim Carney. "It was a dum-dum," replied Sonny O'Neill. Jim Carney has also stated in his later years that a dum-dum had been used in a documentary, The Shadow of Béal na Bláth. Sonny O'Neill had originally 2 clips with 5 bullets in each, and he told Jim Carney he was going to get rid of the rest.
A problem with Meada Ryan's book, The Day Michael Collins Was Shot, is that it relies possibly too much on the testimony of Jim Carney. The problem is there are doubts if Jim Carney was even there. This is mentioned by both Joe Connell in his book Who Shot Michael Collins and by Patrick Tuhig in The Dark Secret of Béal na Bláth. In the maps used in the book, Collins is killed approximately 400 yards to the south of the actual site. However, Meada Ryan is the first to name Dennis Sonny O'Neill as the man who fired the fatal shot.
Dennis Sonny O'Neill detailed being present in Béal na Bláth. In a sworn statement after he applied for military pension in 1934, he had been returning from an IRA divisional meeting when he heard a Free State convoy was in the area. And to quote him, he says, "We accidentally ran into the Béal na Bláth thing. We took up a position there and held it until late in the evening."
Liam Deasy has also confirmed, "We knew it was Sonny O'Neill's bullet." Liam Deasy was also interviewed by Meada Ryan in 1973. He has said, "We regretted the type of bullet used. These were picked up after ambushes during the Tan War." Liam Deasy had said that Sonny O'Neill had personally described the event to the IRA's Chief Intelligence Officer Sean Dowling when he had journeyed to West Cork in September of 1922. This information had been backed up by Seamus O'Donovan. Tom Barry, who had escaped from Marybow Prison in September 1922, gave full details of Michael Collins' death. He had said, "Sonny O'Neill got Collins." The interview with Tom Barry was conducted in 1976. According to Meada Ryan, Jim Carney, Timmy Sullivan, Tom Kelleher, Bill Powell, Jackie Murray, Dennis Lorden, Sean Hyde, Con Murphy, Pat Buttimer, Dan Cahalin, Tom Murray and Jim Doyle also gave this information to her.
So Sonny O'Neill did move around a great deal. He ended up dying, and when he did, it was claimed that he said on his deathbed that he did not do it. Let me give you 2 equally consistent options, I think. Man says all his life, I didn't do it. He's on his deathbed. He says, like Tom Clark did, I'm going to see my God. I guess I better tell the truth here. Option B, I've denied this all my life. I'll deal with my God on my own, but I'm not going to throw my family under the bus. Are those 2 equally believable? The fact that he may or may not have ever said anything on his deathbed, to me, has no evidentiary value. But I do think it was Sonny O'Neill.
I believe Sonny O'Neill admitted to it, and second of all, Sonny O'Neill was the crack shot. And you have to remember, Johnny Collins is, in terms of who he knew and what he knew. I mean, when you drive from Cork City to Clonakilty, Johnny Collins would know all the roads and all the houses, you know?
Yeah.
Very knowledgeable man. And my granddad went to his grave believing it was Sonny O'Neill. I believe Johnny Collins went to his grave believing it was Sonny O'Neill.
Every time you go here, that everybody goes here and to see the cross and to see the little white kind of marker. Many people mistakenly believe that this is the spot that Michael Collins was shot.
So behind me there is the Béal Bláth traditional cross. Okay, and this would have been Collins' first firing position from here. He would have been around the Slieve na Man. Okay, so we're a little bit down from the monument. He's firing from here against the anti-treaty side, but then he moves, he makes a break from the Slieve na Man.
Emmett has also said, the enemy must have observed that something had occurred that had caused a cessation in our fire, because they intensified theirs.
Michael Collins fell between 20 metres according to Patrick Toohig's Dark Secret of Béal na Bláth, and 40 metres according to Edward O'Mahony's book Michael Collins, His Life and Times, from the monument.
And Collins at one stage, there's a lull, jumps up, and then gets hit with a moving shot.
After the ambush, a girl comes along and spots a collar, I think. Is that right?
Yes, there's a picture of a bloody trail, probably where Collins were carried to the armored car. And there's a very clear white piece of cloth on the other side of the road. It's said to be the collar of the shirt.
I dropped him, said Sonny O'Neill to Jim Carney on the following morning with one of these, showing him the flat-nosed slugs, and I dropped Smith with another. Lieutenant Smith was shot in the throat after going to the aid of Collins.
And while he ran to help to carry Collins, he was hit again in the neck, but apparently it was from the same position.
Collins was hit 40 yards up.
Yeah.
Okay,
Dalton said that Collins went back towards the south and that he went just around the far side of a bend and he was momentarily out of sight, was the way he described it. From the perspective of Dalton, who is in here over to the left, he's not necessarily standing on the road, he's trying to shoot in, he's trying to engage the enemy, so he's going to be in off the road as much as he can. The armoured car was over by where the cross is.
Yeah, Derek's currently going where Emmett Dalton would have been. I'm going where we think Collins would have been. So it would have been around here that Collins fell.
So he wasn't shot in by his own side?
No, he was certainly not shot by his own side. In 1924, the Guard sent down a guard named John Hickey to do the first kind of forensic examination of the ambush and that sort of thing. He was sent down to the government to determine if Eamon de Valera had any involvement in the ambush, but he didn't. And that was primarily what Hickey was sent down there to find. One of the other findings that Hickey had that came out of his investigation was that Collins was certainly not shot by his own side.
My name's Kieran McMullen. I'm a retired Field Artillery Lieutenant Colonel, 22 years active duty, Korean DMZ, and Operation Desert Storm. I then went into law enforcement. I spent 14 years in law enforcement. While I was there, I was a firearms instructor and shooting reconstructionist. Dr. Harbison's theory of a high-velocity bullet ricochet that killed Michael Collins is both right and wrong, I believe. It's right from the aspect of a high-velocity bullet is what was used. It's wrong from the aspect of it was a ricochet that hit Collins. there's a number of problems with the ricochet theory. The first is the distance between where Collins was and where the armored car was and where the shooting was coming from. The second and the biggest problem is the entrance wound. Both Dr. Dougherty and Dalton specifically state that it's a small entrance wound on the left and a large exit wound on the right. Now, a ricochet does not normally make a small entrance wound. In this first picture, you'll see two bullet holes. The one on the left is made by a Mark VII 303 round fired from a Lee Enfield. You'll notice how it's perfectly round and it's small. On the right is the same Mark VII type round fired from the same rifle, but at steel plate 3/8 inch thick at an angle of 30 degrees. And you can see how it has yawed once it hit the steel and it went into the pine at an angle. That's what a ricochet does. It's very rare that a ricochet will make a small, perfectly round entrance wound. Now this next picture is an actual entrance wound in human flesh. It's a 9mm round, but it shows very distinctly what you expect from a shot from a distance into flesh. It's round, it's small, there's no stippling around it, which means it's been fired from a distance. It's not a contact wound because there's no breakage from pressure from gases around the wound. So we know this is a distant shot, and that's what you would expect in Michael Collins on the left-hand side. This next picture is an actual entrance wound from a ricochet into a human skull. This is what one would see for an entrance wound from a ricochet, much more likely. Now, before we get to the issue of the exit wound, I'd like to talk about the contention that Collins had been shot by pistol shot from within the members of his own organization. If you look at these two pictures, the one on the left is a .455 entry hole. The one on the right is a .303 entry hole. You can see the obvious difference. The .455 on the left would be very obvious as an entry wound, and so I don't believe that that's what happened. It would have been remarked on at the time, and it was not.
Dr. Harbison is a state pathologist interviewed in the documentary The Shadow of Béal na Bláth. Dr. Harbison concludes that the gaping wound at the back of Michael Collins's head suggests an exit wound from a high-velocity projectile such as a rifle. The velocity has a much bigger effect on the net force than the actual weight of a bullet. A bullet from a rifle travels at 3,000 feet per second, while a bullet from a revolver travels at 700 feet per second. Claims were made that Collins was shot with a Webley revolver. This negates the claims that Emmett Dalton fired the fatal shot. His revolver was found by anti-treaty people clean and with all capsules, without any sign of being fired.
As far as the exit wound, at the site there were two types of bullets being used. And the reason we know this is because O'Neill says there was. Now, I believe Sonny O'Neill is the one who fired the fatal shot, and I believe it for the following reasons. Number one is that he told Commandant Dowling that he fired the shot. He never was questioned about it. He was never brought up in his pension application, but he had stated that he did it. James Kearney, who was at the ambush also stated that O'Neill was the one who took the shot. We know that there was heavy firing, that there was a lull in the firing, and then O'Neill takes the shot. O'Neill also said that he was using dum-dum bullets that day that he had saved from a raid on the RIC barracks. He had, in a previous time, been on a raid in the RIC barracks and had saved some dum-dum ammunition. Now, what he's talking about are not literally dum-dums. It's a generic term at this point. What he's talking about is the Mark V hollow point bullet that was issued to the RIC.
Dr. Harbison, state pathologist in the shadow of Béal na Bláth, has said that he is not convinced of the dum-dum bullet theory because, in his own words, he said it hasn't cropped up in his own practice. Most bullets are lead with a coating that is harder of a Cooper nickel jacket.
The reason they have these bullets is that they had been declared illegal by the Hague Convention. And rather than waste the ammunition, the British government had taken those Mark V's, issued them to the RIC with instructions that they were to be used only for training purposes. And so the Mark V's find their way to RIC barracks all throughout the country. So if during the War of Independence you did a raid on an RIC barracks, it's not at all unlikely that you're going to walk away with some of this ammunition. So there's no reason to doubt that he in fact had saved some. Now, in this next picture, you're going to see on the left a Mark V and on the right a Mark VII. You can see how large the expansion is with the hollow point when it hits something. And on the right, you'll notice the peculiar look of the Mark VII. Now, the Mark VII has its own problems.
Did you mention about, you said there's paper tipped bullet, is that right?
The Mark VII actually has a paper or an aluminum tip, and there's lead behind the paper.
Okay.
And then the entire bullet is wrapped in copper. So it's a jacketed bullet, a full metal jacket, but it's paper in front, which means it's very light. So when it hits something, it folds in half and yaws fairly quickly and goes base first through what it hit. And that creates a large transfer of kinetic energy, which results in a very large temporary wound and permanent wound channel.
Obviously, Dr. Harbison was talking about a Mark VII bullet and not the Mark V bullet, which Kieran had mentioned, which was outlawed by the Hague Convention. Joe Connell has stated in his book, Who Shot Michael Collins?, that the wound that killed Collins was exactly what one would expect from a high-velocity rifle of the time. A small entry wound behind his left ear and a massive exit wound on the right or back of his head. Rex Taylor's 1958 book on Michael Collins backs up this theory with evidence from Private Michael Corrie, who was co-driver of the touring Leyland Thomas car, who said, "General Collins, who had been lying firing from a position 6 feet from me, now stood erect, and after firing several rounds, fell on the roadside, with a gaping wound near the left earlobe extending to the upper section of the skull. There was also a tear in the front of the forehead, and a hole nipped in the front of his cap close to the badge." Meader Ryan's interview with Bill Powell has said it was Sonny O'Neill. Dennis Lenihan of the National Collins 22 Society has said it's most likely Sonny O'Neill. Tim Pat Coogan has said it was Sonny O'Neill. Father Patrick Tuhig has said it's quite likely that Sonny O'Neill topped the list. And Tom Barry, who had received the full story of Michael Collins' death upon his escape from Maryborough Prison in September 1922, had stated in an interview in 1974 that Sonny Neil got Collins. After Béal na Bláth, he had served with Tom Barry in West Cork until December 1922. In James McKay's book, Michael Collins A Life, he has stated Sonny O'Neill, the man who fired the fatal shot, never got over the fact that his unlucky bullet was the one that killed Michael Collins. Sonny confided in Tom Hales that it was he who had shot the big fella, but otherwise he kept it to himself for almost 30 years.
But the man that shot Michael Collins was doing what he believed to be a rightful and justifiable action that had military and strategic importance, and was a man carrying out a legitimate order when viewed from the point of view from an anti-treaty soldier.
Isn't one argument that a ricochet happened off the sleeve of the man?
Yes, that's the Owen Neeson's theory, that bullet ricocheted either on the ground or in the Dermer's car and hit Collins from behind, or a piece of Dermer's car, the bullet took a piece and it hit the head of Collins.
Why do you say that? It's not a ricochet though. If Gargody had said that, there is a left small entrance there.
Because it's not going to be, if for example, one of the theories was it hit the hatch of the armored car and ricocheted. Okay, that bullet is not going to be round anymore. It's going to be twisted or jagged, and if it's a Mark 7, it's going to be folded in half at that point. So there's not going to be a smooth round hole on one side. That's going to be a jagged entry wound. And it would cause the large wound on the backside, but it wouldn't be a smooth entry wound. In fact, I don't believe the ricochet theory is possible, because if it's a small entry wound on the left, then it has to be a bullet that hasn't been malformed. Okay, so there would be a ragged or large hole from a ricochet, because the bullet itself would be deformed at that point. So if Gargady's right in his later interpretation that there was a small wound on the left and a large wound on the right, it's not a ricochet.
Mead O'Ryan had stated that Sonny O'Neill was positioned around Foley's Lane. However, other authors have placed Sonny O'Neill further north, between Foley's Lane and Long's Lane.
One of the more likelier explanations is it was Sonny O'Neill, who either was staying there and shooting, or else he was moving slowly up direction, picking off his shot. He did fight in World War I. He was a sniper there.
In this particular instance, you're firing probably with the battle sight. You have two sights on the weapon. You have the battle sight and you have a ladder sight. In a hostile environment like that, normally at those shorter ranges, you don't take the time to put the ladder sight up and say, yeah, that's about 400 yards. This is what I'm doing. The ladder sight was probably down. He used the battle sight, which is accurate out to 300 yards. It's not exactly the right ammunition for that particular sight, but it's close enough. So my position would be that the most likely thing is he was closer to Collins than that 400 yards. He had to be within that 200-yard range. That's my opinion.
Yeah. And is it possible to, like, let's say in the heat of battle, just do a wild shot from 400 yards and a possibility of connection, or is that,
No, we had an old saying in the Army: "Big sky, little bullet." So is it possible? Absolutely. Is it likely? Probably not. But a man-sized target at 400 yards, you have to take the time to get the shot.
Sure.
And if you are in fact in a hurry, and remember this ambush is kind of happening on the spur of the moment. It was all planned. It fell apart, and all of a sudden, hey, here they come.
Yeah.
So in the rush, I would believe that he's using the battle sight. He's closer up, and that's when he takes the shot.
The bowring here, which was the first escape route, the southernmost escape route from the ambush point. Sonny O'Neill was positioned here. This was the escape route of the anti-treaty IRA that day. This is the meandering bowring.
Now hang on, pointing down here you can see
You can clearly see 1, 2, 3 road signs that are affixed to telegraph poles, and just beyond vaguely see a road sign to its left on the ground. That's where we marked the spot where Collins fell. Now, if you're looking at the position of where Sonny O'Neill was, it's here. Now you're talking, that's only about 150 yards. For a trained sniper, that's not a difficult shot.
From what people say, from the possibility of the bullet trajectory.
O'Neill, from here, his comrades are treating along this way. They're going up a hill and back down a hill as the bowring here bends, and he's here providing cover and fire.
There's a picture of the time that shows a blood patch where he was carried, and it's on the riverside, on the Burying side, and left side.
Adriana said that she got that from Patrick Tuhig and Edward O'Mahony's maps.
According to Liam Deasy, the meeting was adjourned immediately, and many of us left with heavy hearts. To those of us who had known Michael Collins personally, and there were many, his death was tragic. To Tom Hales, Tygo Sullivan, and myself, who had known him intimately, our sorrow was deep and lasting. The person who pulled the trigger was merely the instrument of the person with the intent. Una Mulhern, the niece of Michael Collins, has said in a documentary that the ambush was set there for him, and whether it was a bullet by accident or not, the ambush was set. They intended to kill him. In T. Ryle Dwyer's book, he recounts that Tom Hales had been reluctant to ambush Collins, but Liam Deasy had insisted. From what I know of Collins, he's not going to come back tonight, Liam Deasy has said. We'll have another try in the morning.
I believe that Liam Lynch was in Grand Ray on the evening before, as were Liam Deasy and De Valera. I believe discussed there was the prospect of peace negotiations.
De Valera walked up the incline from the cross at Béal na Bláth towards Murray's house, where Bill Powell was standing. Bill Powell mentioned to De Valera that Michael Collins had gone past. He has said, "I can still picture Dev looking out across the valley, no smile, stern as always, and all he said was, 'A pity. Pity I didn't meet him.'" He turned and we both walked silently into Bill Murray's kitchen.
I believe that meeting continued the following day in Murray's farmhouse. It was the ambush accidental. I believed that those plans were outlaid and may well have been approved of by Lynch. It would appear that only one officer present at that meeting wanted to continue with the war against the national troops. It would be logical but speculative to say that officer was Liam Lynch. All personnel were divided into a military operation and carried out preparations with precision and forethought that would imply at least that the ambush had to be organised and not happenstance. Combining all the evidence would point that there is more than a prima facie case, that these men were there for a purpose, either to end the Civil War or to reignite it by killing Collins, and knew of his presence in the area.
They wanted Collins to stop. They blocked the road. They had a mine in the road. That was the original plan. So if you want to ambush your enemy, you try and get them to stop. Again, you've chosen the ambush position.
Yeah.
You want the enemy to stop there. You don't want him to be able to flee from there.
In an interview Liam Deasy gave to Mead Ryan in 1973, he has recalled that Eamon de Valera asked him what he thought was likely to happen. Liam Deasy had replied, "Some men were involved in the Cork withdrawal, and because of this, they are in a hostile frame of mind." He further explained to de Valera that they would consider the entering of enemy forces an intrusion. Along this Bandon route, not one active volunteer joined the Free State Army. It seems like a challenge that they can't refuse to meet. It's most likely we'll prepare for an ambush. This was Liam Lynch's area, was it?
Yes. It's actually the 1st Southern Division. He left to become chief of staff. The general became Liam Deasy. Yes, right after the ambush, Deasy and the adjutant of the division, that was Tom Crofts, they sent a letter to Lynch telling about the ambush, what they did, and that Collins died. And Lynch wrote back congratulating them for the ambush and saying, criticizing the fact that they didn't have a mine. They actually did, but they failed to mention it in the dispatch.
The adjutant of the 1st Southern Division, who was nearby, reported to Liam Lynch 2 days later. 1. On Tuesday, the 2nd, at approximately 8:35, a party of Free Staters, about 30 strong, passed Béal na Bláth on the road to Bandon. They were preceded by a motorcyclist and travelled in a touring car, lorry and armoured car. Michael Collins was one of the party. 2. A picked column, 32 in number, was mobilised and took up a position about a quarter of a mile from Béal na Bláth to await the return. 3. At 6 p.m. we got definite information from Bandon that the party had gone to Clonakilty. At 7:45 p.m. we gave up hope of anything and decided to withdraw for the night. 4. Some of us had got as far as the cross at Béal na Bláth when a messenger came in great haste with information that the party had returned and were held up on the road by our barricade. 5. Fortunately, 6 of our men had not left their position and 3 more managed to get back. Fire was immediately opened on the enemy by this section. The rest tried to get back to assist their comrades, but were never in a position during the engagement to render any real assistance. 6. The firing was terrific. The enemy relied chiefly on his machine guns. Now and again you could hear the crack of a rifle from our little party, who never budged an inch from their position. 7. The engagement lasted 1 hour. The enemy managed to remove the barricade. Our men were too far away to cover this part with their fire. They beat a retreat, leaving the motorcycle behind, towards Cork. Our men continuing to fire on them. 8. I have since learned that Michael Collins was shot dead during the engagement. Our casualties were nil. 9. The greatest praise is due to the 9 men who stuck to their positions under such a heavy fire. They claim to have wounded at least 3 more of the enemy. 10. The enemy used explosive bullets in whatever little rifle firing they indulged in. 11. During the journey, Michael Collins travelled in the touring car and made himself very prominent. 1 or 2 things that may not be correct. about this assessment is the size of the escort would have been overestimated, as well as explosive bullets were not used.
Liam Lynch, number one. He's the only one that I've read who's gloated over the death when he did actually say, he commended the operation and did wish for more people to be killed, but he did say it was tragic that someone who gave so much as Michael Collins had to die, Oh, I mean, to be honest, yeah, you would say Liam Lynch, number one, Liam DC, number two. Dev supplied the verbal encouragement, but, Liam Lynch, without a doubt.
Liam Lynch had an interesting response to DC in correspondence the next day. He has said, reporting on the attack on the enemy at Béal na Bláth to hand yesterday, considering the very small number of men engaged, this was a most successful operation, and they are to be complimented on the fight made under such heavy fire and against such odds. Considering you were aware of the fact that the convoy contained an armoured car, it is surprising you had not mines laid to get this. Nothing could bring home more forcibly the awful, unfortunate national situation at present than the fact that it has become necessary for Irish men and former comrades to shoot such men as Michael Collins, who rendered such splendid service to the Republic in the late war against England. It is to be hoped our present enemies will realise the folly in trying to crush the Republic before it is too late. Michel Lamass, Liam Lynch, Chief of Staff.
Lynch felt the ambush could have been more thoroughly prepared and they could have used more landmines. This is quite critical of your own troops for a happenstance ambush, and would suggest that Lynch knew that deviations had taken place from the original plan. A local man whose land was central to where the fatal shooting emerged collected 12-inch long mine and 7 pounds of gelignite from a house near Newsonstown.
A Tom Foley interview with Patrick Toothig in spring of 1989 has said, at 11 o'clock on the morning of 22nd of August 1922, 3 men left Béal na Bláth in a Model T motorcar. Denny Coveney, Tygo Sullivan, and 17-year-old Tom Foley. This was no joyride. They were in quest of 2 landmines which lay at the home of John Lorden. The ambush had been decided upon, and this was necessary preparation. The mines were in 2 crates. One was 3 feet by 2, the other much smaller. They were standard equipment for the job in hand. Without them, there was no hope of dealing with the expected armoured car. Arriving back with their deadly loads, they found Liam DC drawing battle lines and establishing the line of fire.
And the other thing as well was, what struck me was Liam Lynch's, I gave you the text of the letter that he wrote to Ernie O'Malley, and what he said. For the Republicans, that's the equivalent of taking out Eisenhower on D-Day for the Germans.
Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a whopper of a scalp.
On the 30th of August 1922, Liam Lynch had also written to Ernie O'Malley. Regarding the shooting of Michael Collins, it is indeed a regrettable national position, which nothing could better illustrate. This makes the shooting of such leaders, and with such a splendid previous record, necessary. Or when will the enemy realise the impossibility and hopelessness of his position? Collins's death will probably alter their outlook and affect the higher military command. Collins's loss is one which they cannot fill. The enemy position, from the point of view of military and political leadership, is very bad. We are at present in a much better position if we continue to take advantage of it. With regard to actual attack on Collins's party, this was carried out by 9 men, as the main body had withdrawn, as the party was not expected. By chance, these few men had not left positions. It was a splendid achievement from military point of view, as these 9 men with rifles were opposed by machine guns and greater numbers. Were it not that mines had been raised, armoured car would have been destroyed, as well as lorries. Hope you received my dispatch. On the 27th, Michel Lamasse, Liam Lynch, Chief of Staff.
Military-wise, it was not. I mean, people are looking at this and not looking at it in a military sense. The people that in essence made the decision to attack Collins were not the politician groupings, but the military groupings, and they would have looked at this in a very tactical sense.
Garda Hickey's report on Collins's death in 1924 recounts that the S branch from Bandon conducted the search, and a letter from Liam Lynch to the commander of the ambush flying column was discovered. It referred to the ambush and said it was a pity that Collins was not taken alive, presumably to bargain for favourable peace terms. It also criticised the column commander. You should not have allowed the column to attack at that hour without your being present. It's unfortunate he was shot, and Dan Breen is very upset. You will be notified of a conference at a later date, and this matter will be fully discussed.
Liam Lynch had written to Ernie O'Malley on the 7th of September 1922 regarding peace moves. He has said, "So many private and unauthorized individuals are engaged in endeavoring to bring about peace on various terms, and are putting forward so many different proposals that it is necessary to inform all these individuals that the only body on our side competent to consider any proposals or terms submitted to us, or to put forward terms on which peace may be concluded, is the whole Army Executive." I mention this fact to you in case any proposals may be made to any of our senior officers or the Republican Party in order to cause a division in the Army or amongst Republicans, and so that you may know how to deal with them if they come under your notice. Michel Lamasse, Liam Lynch, Chief of Staff.
What was his view of Michael Collins after Collins was shot?
Well, now that's an interesting question, and you know, when I was preparing the book on the Civil War, No Surrender Here, I really I couldn't find much on that issue. Now, why was that? Well, you have to look at the fact, which is that all I was able to find were the surviving letters or memoranda. Is this something that you would write in a memoranda? And I would say probably no. And if others, I mean, the way Lynch wrote to Ernie around that time in August was merely that one of our men did it, so to speak. So it was factual. However, again, in my 1970, I recall it was in the 1970 interviews I did with people like Maura Comerford and one or two other Sheila Humphreys. When word came to Aylesbury Road that Collins had been shot, Ernie O'Malley was just appalled and chagrined and knew the consequences of what would happen the replacement, not so much. I mean, yes, we lost a great leader and he was fighting him, but he was thinking immediately, and he does record this in No Surrender, in The Singing Flame, of how his reaction is to what the other people who are now surviving Collins will do, because he knows what types they are. And they're far more going to take a tougher stand against the harder stand. And that is borne out by the executions in December, and the other of the 4 plus the 77 people, so they're coming to grips with the reality of how do we threaten the Republicans, and they determined execution is a way to do it, and that they will eventually lie down. So I think there's nothing much in writing, but I've heard from other people that he was deeply affected by the loss, because if he knew the implications.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Barry recounts the story of after he died, how up to 400 irregular prisoners or enemy prisoners in Mountjoy spontaneously broke into an act of, started saying the rosary.
Because remember the story of all the guys when they're told in Mountjoy jail, these are the Republicans who, came out of the forecourts on the 5th of June, end of June, and they're in Mountjoy, and they kneel down and say a prayer.
That's right, yeah.
They were former comrades in arms and so on.
Shortly after the ambush, a couple of men went back, and they actually found the cap, which they believed to be Collins' cap because of blood and so on, but they didn't know what to do with it. So they took it to Tom Hales, and he decided that the best thing to do was to bury it. So they buried it on the land of Jim Murray's house. That was actually not too far from the site of the ambush. But Jim Murray had pigs and cattle and stuff, and he feared that the cap would be dug up, so revealed. So he himself decided to dig it up, but they didn't know what to do with it at the time. And you can imagine, discovering that after knowing that it was Collins that was killed, this is the thing that he was wearing at the time, but it was then kept for a number of years. So when they gave it to him, he thought the best thing to do was to bury it, interr it, but before he did that, he actually cut the badge off it. And just to quote what was said here, with the aid of a penknife, he carefully levered off the front badge and diamond, a souvenir of a friend, he said sadly, and he put it in his back pocket. There was a very real chance that the Collins family could have been burying 2 members of the Collins family, because Sean Collins, Michael's brother, he went on the same road that the ambush had taken place, with going up to Cork, because all the roads had been entrenched. There were very few roads that you could actually use at that time, because they'd been all dug up and sort of fairly well destroyed. And he was captured by the anti-treaty IRA, and the younger men were quite willing to kill Sean Collins, to kill the brother of Michael Collins, because you imagine, again, in their minds, this would be a huge coup for the anti-treaty IRA. You don't get one Collins, you get two of them.
A contemporary newspaper article published 24th of August 1922 is entitled General Collins's Brothers' Experience. The irregulars' mentality is clearly revealed by Sean Collins, a member of Cork County Council. When we arrived in Bandon, we were told that we must take the Macroom Road, as the main road to Cork was impassable owing to the irregular operations. About a mile outside the town, we were fired upon, and when we stopped, an irregular who had discharged 3 shots told us that if we had not pulled up when we did, we would have been plugged. Other irregulars then came up, and we were asked to leave the car by one of these men, who in a jubilant manner spoke of their having plugged McKean, meaning my brother. Another said that my brother was not much of a fighter, and remarked that I had not the pluck to stand up and be plugged. I replied that I was not afraid even of that. Then one of the irregulars intervened and put a stop to the controversy. We were carefully searched, but of course we were unarmed. We were then taken to a public house, and one of the irregulars offered us refreshments. We were detained there until midnight. My comrade had tea, but I refused to take it from hands stained with the blood of my brother.
Also have to remember, I think it was 48 hours after Michael Collins was killed, these anti-treaty boys kidnapped Johnny Collins, and it was Tom Hales who stormed the house and said, "Let him go."
And Tom Hales, stepped in and said, "Do not harm a hair on his head, because if you do, it's me you're going to deal with." But then they turn on him and then start threatening his brother, saying that we're not just going to get, we're going to get your brother, Brigadier Sean Hales. Now, I don't know if that was me, and there was younger men threatening my family. I don't know how Tom Hales, I don't know if I'd be that would be able to hold it together, but Tom Hales did. But if you can imagine that was the attitude of the younger men, that they're threatening the brother of their commanding officer. Could you imagine that, Marcus? That there was the real possibility that the Collins family could be burying 2 of them.
I will leave with some comments, or I will end with some comments of the impact of Collins' death. All we recall, the broken-hearted brother Johnny leaning over the open coffin in City Hall.
One thing that gets thrown at Collins a little bit, like this is, I suppose, maybe a little bit negative in terms of looking at Collins, is that he was a dictator in the sense that he always wanted to take over
everybody else's job. Yeah.
Could that have been his greatest downfall, do you think, in terms of?
Well, I think it obviously was a flaw. You must learn to delegate. It was both his strength and his weakness,
Yeah.
Collins's problem was he wasn't a combat veteran.
Yeah.
He didn't understand. You don't stop for an ambush.
Yeah.
You go through it, or you go back from it, but you don't stay in the kill zone.
In Marjorie Foster's book, Michael Collins, The Lost Leader, Joe Dolan has lamented, if it had only been Collins's own drivers, the Highland brothers, at the wheel. They knew their impetuous chief and would almost certainly have obeyed Dalton's order and driven on at full speed for a couple of miles before pausing to inquire of Collins. What's that you were saying?
His behaviour during the ambush contributed. He put himself in harm's way by his conduct during the ambush. First of all, in countermanding Emmett Dalton's instruction to the driver to get the hell out of the ambush, that's just convention military thinking. You don't stop in an ambush. The first thing you do in an ambush is you get the hell out of the ambush.
Michael Collins did a lot of things on that day which led to the position in which he found himself when he was killed. He did not act as a soldier. He did not even act as a commander-in-chief. He did not even act as someone who should have known that in that county he was very much at risk. And he did not act as someone who was trying to make a deal with people who he knew they were down there and were on the other side. But remember too, he had just left Sam's Cross. He had just left the pub where he was idolized by the people around there. And I think he misinterpreted exactly how that was in the middle of a very Republican, very anti-treaty military area. I think he contributed greatly to what happened to him at Béal and Bláth.
Michael Collins has written in his notebook the day before he was shot, "The people here want no compromise with the irregulars. The people are splendid."
Joseph Sweeney, Sean Hales and Florence O'Donoghue had all given Collins warnings.
Did he make a bad decision to stop a fight? Well, of course he did. Yeah. Was the high temperature and lack of sleep impairing his judgment, which maybe impaired his patience, and he just blew and said, "I'm going to fight them"? Was it also because there were so many attempts that he's actually gone, "Okay, I'm not going to let this one go. I've let the other three go. I'm not going to let this one go. I'm going to get them. I'm sick of this. I'm going to get them. How dare they, in my own county, down the road from my house, how dare they do this?" Should they have driven like hell? Of course they should.
Do you think, what do you think of the argument that Michael Collins killed Michael Collins?
Marcus, I think that is the argument. I would be on board with that, because just looking at it from from a soldier's perspective, from a person who's been in battle, if you come under fire, you do not come out from cover. And as soon as the battle started, Emmett Dalton, Sean O'Connell, the other men that are there run for cover. They're protecting themselves. I do think that Collins actually had a lot to do with Collins getting shot. I don't think he was acting like a soldier at the time when the ambush happened.
Did Michael Collins kill Michael Collins in terms of his lack of experience as a soldier?
Maybe it's a factor. He was a very brave man. He was very. He didn't have a personal fear of danger.
The first commander-in-chief of the army was Michael Collins.
How should he be remembered?
Well, I think he should be remembered as the British remember him. They're one of their greatest military foes that they've ever faced, up there with George Washington and up there with Napoleon. He should be remembered as someone who brought a country from that was on the backwaters of the world, and he gave us our own government. He gave us our own state. We were able to build a nation, for all its faults, something that we could be proud of. Yeah, he should be remembered as a man who made Ireland ungovernable and unadministrable too. Let's face it, a foreign invader.
And one thinks of Yeats, soldier, statesman, horseman he, as it were, life's epitome, what made us think he would comb grey hair. This letter was written from the playwright George Bernard Shaw to Hanny Collins on the death of her brother Michael on the 22nd of August 1922. Priorsfield, Godalming, Surrey, England, August 22. My dear Miss Collins, don't let them make you miserable about it. How could a born soldier die better than at the victorious end of a good fight, falling to the shot of another Irishman, a damn fool, but at the same time an Irishman who thought he was fighting for Ireland, a Roman to a Roman. I met Michael for the first and last time on Saturday last, and I'm very glad I did. I rejoice in his memory and will not be so disloyal too as to snivel over his valiant death. So tear up your mourning and hang out your brightest colours in his honour, and let all praise God that he had not to die in a stuffy bed of a trumpery cough, weakened by age and saddened by the disappointments that would have attended his work had he lived. Sincerely, George Bernard Shaw.
What's your favourite Michael Collins story? Of all the stories, you must have a favourite.
Well, what struck me about Michael Collins was the terrible effect his assassination had on the family.
Sure.
The terrible effect. And my father speaks of when he was he was in uniform, he was in the army at this stage, that when they brought the body back, they couldn't take it en route by road because the roads were all mined. So they took it, the SS Classic brought the body back, and the story I'm going to tell you now, they moved out into the harbour. All the local people in Cove were kneeling down, saying the rosary as the hearse was taken on board. And when they moved out into the harbour, there was a British destroyer, and they gave it salute.
When the ship neared Cove, the high bell on St. Colman's Cathedral resounded. Emmett Dalton recalls that, beside the harbour, men from the British destroyer fleet stood to attention on deck. We were greeted with a salute of trumpets from the sailors. As we went quietly on, they sounded the last post. I will never forget the sight and the sound. All the windows of the houses in Cove were lit. They flickered like fairy lights. The strains of the music over the water was most impressive. It would bring tears to a stone.
Resonated, my father said, they resonated across the water, and it had a profound effect on him. And they were, that was their farewell to a great man who paid the price for signing a treaty, who gave us the best deal we got.
Tranon injana higen kashlasakam tam shem khala snadoishterme sheyar khaslem hev nan spervan Time shem khalu snadoishterme.
I remember when my father tell me stories of before, of the risings and rebellions, Fitzgerald's and Wolftown, the land wars and the slum lords, imperial penal law, how 1 million died of hunger from the great ungodly war. My father died an old man when I was just a boy. And he says to me, now Michael, oh, right before he died, one day you'll be a great man with a hunger in your heart. You'll do great things for Ireland, oh, you'll try and win her back. Oh, my name is Michael Collins, on the rebel county Cork, where I learned an Irish vocation, how to stand up and to talk. I came toe to toe with an empire and a pen in my hand.